Have you ever been lost in the wilderness? I can remember when I was about 5 years old. I don't remember exactly how old I was. And some friends came to visit my parents, and they had a young son who was a bit older than me. And he wanted to go for a walk up beyond our back fence. Now, beyond our back fence was basically miles and miles of empty scrub. And I knew I wasn't supposed to go there, but he was quite adamant, and so I dutifully followed. It wasn't very long before we realised that we were totally lost. At which stage he panicked and ran off, leaving me. And it was an old gold mining area. There were lots of mine pits around, and he fell in one. He was very lucky. It was only about 2 metres deep, so he wasn't seriously hurt, and that's where they found him. He couldn't get out. I wandered along for a little bit and sat down by a creek and bawled my eyes out. And that was a good thing, because the noise of me bawling, very loud, top of my lungs, helped the people who were looking for us find me. Had I known what I know now, I wouldn't have been lost at all, because I was by a little creek, and creeks always, or a little rivulet really. I could step across it without getting my feet wet, but there was water running down it, and water running down in a little rivulet joins other rivulets and eventually joins a creek and becomes ultimately a river. And just down in the valley that this little rivulet was heading to was a creek called Jupiter Creek. And it ran through our front garden, so had I followed it down the hill, found the creek, followed the creek along downstream, I would have come back to our house and everything would have been fine. But I didn't know that then. Now, you might be saying, oh, come on, Australian bush isn't wilderness. But the Greek word that's used in our New Testament reading is for simply an uninhabited place. It's uninhabited, not uninhabitable. Okay? So this bushland fits that. If you're actually in a desert, then you need special skills to survive. Our Australian Aboriginals in the outback have those skills. We don't. We would die very quickly there. They can survive quite, well, reasonably comfortably. Bushmen in the Kalahari would be another example where the people with the knowledge can survive, but ordinary people can't. But even in the wilderness, you have to know some things to survive, and we'll come back to that. You probably at this stage really happy that I'm speaking about sort of the second section of our reading, which is the lectionary reading for today, and not the first section and making you repeat your baptismal vows or something. But Mark and Luke both tell the same story, but with quite a lot more detail. They list what the temptations. This says Jesus, he was tempted by the devil. How? Well, he was tempted to make food, he was tempted to throw himself off the temple, etc., etc. Mark, that's not important. The fact is he's out in the wilderness. Why in the wilderness? Well, wilderness is symbolic. And if we look through the Old Testament, Moses killed an Egyptian overseer, discovered that everyone knew about it, and in fact even Pharaoh heard about it and was going to have him punished. So he fled off into the wilderness. In the story of the Exodus which follows, Moses led the Israelites through the wilderness to the promised land. In the story of Elijah, do you remember the story where there were 500 priests, prophets of Baal in Israel, and they had the ear of the king because of his wife Jezebel? The king was Ahab, and Elijah, prompted by God, said, look, let's find out who's really God. And they gathered up these 500 priests of Baal, and he said, let's offer up a sacrifice. And so they built an altar, they slaughtered a bull, put it on top, and he said, all right, now the priests of Baal are about to set fire to it. He said, no. If your God's real, let him set fire to it. And so they prayed hard, and they cut themselves, and they wailed and they moaned all day, and nothing happened. And Elijah said, well, look, this is too easy. Look, there's some water containers. Go down to the creek down there and cover the whole thing with water. Let's make it difficult for me. No, more water. So the water was pouring down, making the wood all soggy, filling the trench around it. And then Elijah prayed to God, and there was a huge fire that consumed everything, including the rocks around. And Moses said, now you know which God you should be listening to. And he took the 500 prophets of Baal down into the valley, took out a sacrificing knife and cut the throats of every one of them. Next thing you know, Jezebel isn't happy about this. Surprise, surprise. And she says, I'm going to kill you. Where does Elijah go? Out into the wilderness to get away from her. Mountaintop experience. He's suddenly brought down into the valley by Jezebel's message that I'm going to kill you. And he flees into the wilderness. So wilderness is symbolic of getting away from everything. But the magic number 40, in the Bible, every number has a special meaning. And 40, if you've got a concordance at home, just look up the number 40. It will be there, and there'll be pages of it. So the Exodus, for example, the children of Israel ate manna in the desert for 40 years. Okay? The story of Noah. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. It's sort of a formula. And in fact, our reading said he was in the wilderness 40 days. Matthew and Luke actually say 40 days and 40 nights to underline it. Now, you may think you don't know who Hoshea was, but Hoshea was one of 12 men, one from each tribe, sent by Moses into Canaan to seek out the land. And they were in there 40 days and 40 nights. Hoshea, you say, why should I know that? Well, Moses called him Joshua, so you know that one. Elijah, he went into the wilderness. He travelled for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb, out there, and hid himself in a cave. And of course, God revealed himself, not in the fire, not in the earthquake, not in the storm, but in the still, small voice. So 40 is a very meaningful number. Now you might say, is it feasible? Well, without water, you last 2 or 3 days, a week at most. And that's if you're very well hydrated when you start out. That is still the case. earlier this year, Bianca got dehydrated. We took her to hospital and they said she is so dehydrated there's only 50% chance that she will recover from this. Do you want us to try? And we said, yeah, we don't think she's quite ready to go yet. So they did. And God is amazing because she is actually now more mentally active than she was a year before when she went into care. So going without water is a serious thing, and you get to a point where just giving you a glass of water is not going to cut it. But he fasted. He didn't go without water. Okay? He's in wilderness, not desert. It's not hard to find water. So, 40 days without food. That's a bit more problematic. People have died after 43 days without food. Now, scientists would love to research this, just how long can a person survive without food. It's not quite ethical, is it? So all they can go on is cases where it's happened. And the longest is actually nearly 3 months. So it's survivable. And this is what happens. The first 2 or 3 days, you're basically living off the food and water that's already in your body. And then your liver starts to produce a substance called ketone. And there are some diets that deliberately put you in this phase, and it does damage your body. It's not a great idea, but it burns the fat, turns fat into glucose, so you survive off your fat. By day 7, you've used up most of your fat and you're starting to burn your muscle mass. So after 40 days, at the very best, you're going to look like a survivor of the Burma railways. You know, you've possibly seen pictures of them. They're skin and bone and not much else. Not because they were totally starved, but they were effectively starved. So by day 14, you start to lose heart, liver and kidney function, and you're going to be very weak after 30 days, and the shortest time that someone has survived is 43 days. So 40 days really pushing it, but it is a symbolic number. It doesn't necessarily, unless you want to read the Bible very literally, doesn't necessarily mean exactly 40 days. He spent a time in the wilderness and fasted. And fasting doesn't always mean not eating. The Muslims have a feast called, a fast called Ramadan, which lasts for a lunar month, 29, 30 days. And during that, they don't eat or drink during the day, but once the sun goes down, they feast. And it's quite possible that Jesus did something like that. So, what we really want to think about in this is probably not, oh, is this real? You know, could he have survived it? But why did he go out there? And he went to consider his calling away from distractions. Okay? So there's a purpose to Jesus going out in the wilderness. He didn't want the distraction of the disciples around him. He didn't want the distraction of people around him. He wanted to be alone with God, because God is present in the wilderness as much as he's present here in the church. And that's an important point to remember. And thinking about wilderness, I guess we've all had wilderness experiences. experiences that felt like we were lost and alone and far away from any help. I certainly have several that sort of jump out at me through my life, and some lesser ones as well. Think of your wilderness experiences, times of struggle, times of loss, times of pain, times of testing. You can feel very lonely. I know some of mine, I felt like I was falling over a cliff, holding on to the edge with just my fingernails. And my fingernails aren't really good because they break and crack very easily, so I was in real trouble. And it's no fun. I don't recommend it for anyone, but these are the times when we learn to rely on God, when we learn what is real in our life. We learn who our real friends are, amongst other things. God will help us through that wilderness. Christian friends will help us, and even Christian strangers will help us through the wilderness. One of these times I went to a service down Port Nalunga Way, an evening service, and I was talking to someone, and I sort of let on that I was having a trying time and he said, "Let me pray for you." Now, I didn't really know him from Adam, and he put his hand on my shoulder and he prayed, and it helped. You can, as a Christian friend, also give practical help. But practical help's only good if it's the help that's needed. So, call me if doesn't really cut it, because they never will. What can I do to help you now is helpful, because it means you're serious about it. Can I pray for you? Can I make you a meal? Can I invite you for an evening meal? Do you need me to take the kids to school and pick them up for you? There are 1,000 things depending on the circumstances. And you can really help someone through this wilderness experience by just taking a little bit of that load off of them. And looking back, would I forego those wilderness experiences if I could? At the time, I'm sort of saying, "Lord, I don't want to be here. Get me out of this." But when I look back, no, I wouldn't give these up, because these are times of growth. These are the times where you find that you can rely on God. These are the times where you can find that inner strength that comes from saying, "Well, Lord, this is out of my control. You take control and help me through this." So, Moses found God in the wilderness. Well, it might be more accurate to say God found Moses, because you remember the story of the burning bush. Jesus found his life's work in the wilderness. Now, I don't want to wish wilderness experiences on you. They're absolutely no fun. But if you are going through a wilderness experience, trust in God, because God does come through for you. And be open to learning. Learn where God wants you to be, learning what God wants you to do, learning perhaps to become a better person. Now, we have a hymn.